This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by NYSE Governance Services, Corporate Board Member, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter, Chairman of the NYSE Governance Services, Corporate Board Member, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about something that we really haven't talked about in a while, and that's internal audit and the board. We all know that internal audit ends up being the board's eyes and ears for a lot of things that happen within the company, and it's important that they have a good relationship, and we're here to talk about that. And who better to talk about that than my guest today? Please welcome Warren Stippich, who's the Partner and National Governance, Risk, and Compliance Solution Leader for Grant Thornton. Welcome, Warren.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, TK.
And in our business, governance, risk, and compliance is traditionally called GRC. So if we refer to GRC, we know that we're referring to sort of that group of things that are important, sort of look across. But one of the reasons that we wanted to have you on is that Grant Thornton just completed its survey with the chief audit executives, and or another acronym, what we call CAEs. And that survey has some interesting information in that. So what trends and what did you see coming out of that survey and your discussions with clients subsequent to that?
Sure, great to talk about it, TK. Our fourth annual Chief Audit Executive Survey, in fact, and this year, more than ever, we're continuing to see the theme of increasing burden of regulatory and compliance issues facing chief auditors, the internal audit functions, and then by virtue of that, the audit committees. It's interesting, 10, 11, 12 years later, after Sarbanes-Oxley 404 came onto the scene, we're seeing this increased effort around compliance and regulatory demands. Not only Sarbanes-Oxley, but other regulatory demands that have emanated over the years with increased scrutiny from various regulators and other governing bodies. Statistically, just pointing out a couple of things here, of the issues and concerns facing CAEs, 74% this year, about flat with last year's roughly 80%, said that half of their audit plan is focused on compliance and regulatory issues. So that's of everything that the internal audit function needs to look at. About half of their time they're spending looking at compliance and regulatory issues. The dilemma that's facing chief auditors is how to continue to value add or to do other things with their budget, with their time, with their function to provide value and benefit to the organization, management stakeholders, and the board. We've seen come on the scene this year the new COSO, the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission has put out the new COSO release. So that's creating some additional things for auditors to do and auditors to look at. And chief auditors want to make sure that they're continuing to add value in their efforts with helping management and the organization, but also need to make sure that they're doing the blocking and tackling. And so in some respects, this is a competing demand that organizations need to look at. As a chief auditor and working with many chief auditors, what's being done is we're thinking about ways that we can add value while taking care of what needs to get done to keep the regulatory and compliance pieces of the shop going. And a couple of things that we're seeing and we asked some questions on is continued use and leverage of technology, using technology in such things as automated and continuous auditing, data analytics, using more technology to accomplish a greater coverage in less time and being more efficient. And 92% of chief auditors believe that they can use up to half of their internal control and internal audit testing for other compliance mandates, which is fantastic. And we're going to talk a bit about one-to-many in a few minutes here. And of course, talent. We hear a lot about talent in our survey and the need for more talent.
So when you come away from the survey and your discussions, how effectively are companies addressing the challenges that you just presented?
They are challenges, and it's a never-ending burden or balance, I should say, of the burden of competing regulatory and compliance demands along with adding value, and that's in quotes, but how do the stakeholders, management, and the board perceive added value from the internal audit function? And that's where the challenge lies for all chief auditors and internal audit shops, is to strike that balance. Because the compliance burden in many sectors is so great and ever increasing, there might be a disproportionate amount of resources being used on compliance things and not allowing enough time for other value-added activities. Statistic: 36% of chief auditors are unable to devote resources to higher value activities in their shop because of the focus on regulatory demands. That's over a third, so that's pretty staggering. 69% of chief auditors cite increased cost as the greatest concern and impact driven by regulation on their internal audit function. And of course, when asked where board and management most frequently ask chief auditors to deliver value, the clear response is trying to mitigate risk. So the internal audit function needs to continually mitigate risk. And we've seen that flat with last year. Organizations are a little bit slow to adopt this technology, so we ask questions about the use of technology, and we're seeing the uptake on using technology a little bit lower than we would have anticipated. 29% of chief auditors are using GRC-specific technology tools, which is up from only 23% last year, and 60%, which is down from 66% last year, of chief auditors are leveraging data analytics for business insights to form good, rock-solid decisions in terms of enhancing risk management.
So when I think of internal audit, though, I don't think of somebody that has a lot of extra time, okay, from that perspective. But but let's assume that that capacity is there. What should the board be doing to sort of help internal audit create this value? And again, you don't hear people talking about internal audit and creating value much, but what can the board do to help the internal audit function increase value?
And that's a great question, TK. I don't always get asked that question because the board sometimes won't say, what can we do to help? And they won't ask us, what is it that we should be giving you? Many times chief auditors are afraid, or maybe that word is too strong, but want to keep everybody happy. And so with increasing burden on regulatory and compliance, which is perceived as lower value for the organization, there's this continuous balancing act going on of the blocking and tackling that needs to get done. The audit committee and the boards might be taking that for granted a bit. With a different set of questions, perhaps the knowledge could be unleashed from the chief auditor that says, here's what we need to accomplish the regulatory and compliance issues. Here's what we could do budget-wise to accomplish other greater value-added operational areas. And then ensues a very healthy discussion that boards could get into, and audit committees and audit committee chairs could get into having with their chief auditors. Again, I think if they feel that, I think audit committees and senior management have been trying to balance the cost of the function and cost of external audit and all these regulatory burden costs. So there's a balancing act going on. The last thing that a chief auditor wants to do is ask for more resources, especially if he can't divert time from the regulatory and compliance areas to value-added areas. But some things that an audit committee or a board member can be mindful of is technology being used enough to leverage the activities of internal audit? Are they using things like data analytics? Do they need some training? Do they need some more resources brought onto the staff to help them be more efficient and get greater coverage? That's a question I don't get very much from an audit committee member. And directors and management can look at internal audit to go beyond the compliance, traditional compliance areas, and I think can be very active in that area and very focused.
You know, that's one of the challenges of management and the board, but particularly management. Everybody's asking for additional resources. And if you look at that use of those resources, just like the use of capital is probably one of the biggest decisions that they have, which is a great segue to my next question, because when you talk about risk, you can't help these days but talk about data and cybersecurity and privacy and those issues. We've seen most recently what's happened with Target. I mean, every study that we do, whether it's directors or corporate secretaries or GCs, IT risk, cybersecurity, data security is at the top of the list. So in this study or in your conversations with the internal audit executives, is that also a number one issue relative to them?
Yes, it's up 65%. So up from 49% last year of chief auditors consider data breach and privacy risk a paramount concern and a potential impact to the organization. So there you go. In terms of the survey timing and everything that's going on, this isn't just driven by the Target news that brought it to the forefront once again, but this has been a risk that's been concerning internal audit leaders for a long time, and boards as well, rightly so. The ever-changing dynamics, there's industry fluctuation here. So certain industries have much more risk around cyber and privacy than other industries. Maybe a manufacturer that's fairly not a household name probably has a little lower risk if the environment's a little simpler versus a financial services organization, a healthcare organization, or somebody with a bigger brand name that could be a drawn target for attack. So this cybersecurity relevance and this cybersecurity question is on everybody's mind. Everybody's studying it, and when I look at the board circuit of training that's going on, this topic is on the agenda, number 1 or 2 on the agenda for board members and audit committee members. So they're becoming as educated in this as anybody else is. So organizations need to make sure that they're not only being responsive to the board and the audit committee, but also being responsive to their stakeholders and their own employees in terms of the risk. The complicating thing with cybersecurity is who owns it and where does it sit in the organization. We've done some studies, there's conventional thinking that it's not just owned by IT, or it's not just owned by the security department. It's certainly not owned by audit, but that there's many different organizational departments that need to come together to work on this and to make sure that they're looking at the trends, they're looking at their risk, and they're looking at their exposure. This February 2014, the National Institute of Standards and Technology issued its updated mandate, its updated information, leading practices, and framework for improving technology and security. So that's something that's relatively new in terms of this being pushed out. Organizations are needing to look at that and digest that, see what it means to themselves, and where do they have gaps. And again, these frameworks are meant to help, but a framework isn't an absolute. So I think organizations, and as boards are becoming better educated, working with their organizations and their chief auditors to keep the monitoring pressure on to mitigate some of this risk.
Well, we certainly recognize the importance. In fact, the NYSE Governance Services will be holding a cyber risk conference for directors in Chicago next month. So it was very well attended last year, and I can only imagine the concern, because the concern continues to grow. So whenever we get a guest like you into the show, we like to ask a question that sort of relates to force them to look into their crystal ball. So as a professional that works with audit committees and other audit executives, when you look at sort of what's happening today and then look out into the future, what concerns you about trends that you see? And then on the counter side of that, what sort of gives you encouragement on that? So we'll start so that we can end on a positive note.
Okay, TK.
Let's start with what concerns you first.
Okay. The challenges facing the internal audit function, facing audit committees charged with governance and oversight, that is going to continue to grow and continue to proliferate. So those mandates, those regulatory burdens, those other constraining factors that some may say are driven by government and regulation, those are going to continue to grow. And we as professionals in our organizations, regardless of where we're sitting, we have to deal with them. We have to take them in. And so I am continually concerned about the ever-increasing burden and making sure that there's the increasing support of resources to deal with that. And those resources come in a lot of different ways.
And isn't that most burdensome for smaller companies that really don't have the resources?
It is. When there's kind of a de minimis of being a public company in particular, and having to deal with the different mandates, there's an entry-level point that's kind of high. And so you've got to get in and put those resources to work, but it doesn't necessarily scale up as you have to come in at a certain spend of resources to deal with the risk.
Yeah. So we got 30 seconds for you to give your positive outlook.
My positive outlook is that I see that audit committees and boards are becoming much more educated as the years have gone by, and even in the last 3 to 5 years are much more astute and aware of the things that are pressuring chief auditors, and I'm seeing a much more collegial and give and take dialogue going on in the boardroom with the chief auditor and management versus the polarizing size of discussion. So that's encouraging for me to see that the audit shop is growing in importance and strategic value to the company.
Good trend.
Very good.
So where can, if somebody wants to see a copy of the survey results, is that on your site?
Yes, absolutely. GrantThornton.com.
Okay.
And very quickly you can click on Internal Audit or Governance, Risk and Compliance and get to our survey as a free download.
Super. We'll encourage everybody to do that.
Very good.
And Warren, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. And we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by NYSE Governance Services, Corporate Board Member, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton. And contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.